Welcome to the Listen Up podcast, where we explore hearing loss, communication, connections, and health.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mark Sims here. I'm the host of the Listen Up podcast, where I feature top leaders in healthcare. This episode is brought to you by Listen Up Hearing Center. I help patients to effectively treat their hearing loss so that they can remain independent and remain better connected with friends and family. The reason I'm so passionate about hearing loss is I lost my brother Robbie twice. First, to hearing loss from radiation to his brain tumor, and then when he passed away. I only care for ears. I'm the E of ENT. I've performed over 10,000 ear surgeries and taken care of many more with hearing loss. I'm the founder of Listen Up Hearing Center, and I've also written a book of the same name, Listen Up, A Physician's Guide to Effectively Treating Your Hearing Loss. If you want to learn more about that, go to www.listenuphearing.com. That's www.listenuphearing.com. I'm excited for our guest today. It's Dr. Brad Stewart. He's a former private practice audiology owner who left his largely automated private practice in 2021. He's the founder and CEO of AudCoach, a peer-to-peer practice management consultancy, and the creator of marketing automation with a play on the automation program. Dr. Stewart is a self-described business geek who is passionate about building training systems to support practice owners. He's an adjunct professor at University of North Carolina. Brad, even though I stumbled over your intro, thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So you're in a pretty cool space, exited. It sounds like you've exited clinical day-to-day practice, and your jam or passion is helping other people to run those practices as well. Can you tell a little bit about your evolution? I mean, obviously, so how'd you get into the hearing space first off?
Yeah, so I started my my journey, I guess, at the University of North Texas. That was where I did my doctorate degree. I actually did a clinical externship in Honolulu. I worked at a practice there that was a private practice that served VA patients and saw a ton of patients who had noise-induced hearing loss from their time in the military, fit a lot of hearing aids, helped a lot of people hear better. It was a really cool experience, and living in Hawaii wasn't too bad either. But my hometown is
Hawaii too. I did my residency at Tripler.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
Lived there for 7 years.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I spent some time up at the Tripler Hospital reviewing paper records. Good memories.
Right.
But I moved back to Dallas. Dallas is where my family's from. That's my home, and so I started working in private practice. And I worked for a practice for a couple of years, and then started my own practice, which I ran for close to 8 years prior to selling that practice. And we did a lot inside of that practice. We saw kind of a wide range of types of patients in that practice. We can talk about that a bit more later, but really for me, I think the passion has always been around the business side of things. I've always really enjoyed just kind of the challenge of learning how to build a business and the satisfaction that comes from not just me helping one patient, but me building a practice where I can expand my own impact out and have other providers helping patients and be part of that. So that's what I love.
So beyond the number of patients you can actually physically see.
That's it.
Yeah, that's great. And so you built a practice. I guess it got to the point where it was successful. Somebody acquired it. Right. And then, so what was your mindset? I mean, one of the things is obviously, you have to be willing to give that up there's got to be a next act. So what was your evolution to think I'm ready to leave and this is what I want to do? So.
Yeah. So, running a private practice and even being somebody who loves the business side of private practice is really challenging. It's a hard lifestyle, and a lot of audiologists are very good and very focused on patient care, and they love providing life-changing care to patients. And none of us really get much business training in our formal education. And so a lot of it's just kind of life tuition, just making mistakes and learning from them.
Sure.
And so I really saw an opportunity to help a lot of practice owners help more patients, support their vision and mission of creating this huge impact in their communities, and kind of take the stress and the uncertainty of managing the practice a little bit off of their shoulders so they could focus on doing the thing that they love, which is helping patients.
So when you kind of break that down, in terms of managing a practice, can you break that down into different segments? Like, in other words, not that, I mean, obviously managing a practice is stressful, but like, what are the components of that are stressful and that you have kind of, help people or don't? Like, you might say, I don't help people with hiring and firing. I don't know what you do. Like, personnel is obviously a stressful part. There might be areas where you're better or worse, or that you've got expertise or not. So
I have a few specific things that I spend the most time working with practices on. For example, one thing that I do quite a bit of is helping audiologists launch mobile audiology practices where they actually go out and provide in-home care primarily to like senior living facilities and that sort of thing. That's how I started my practice. We actually, at one point, were providing in-home care for about 100 senior living facilities in the Dallas market in my practice. So I teach other audiologists how to kind of develop that business model for their own businesses, which is fun because that's a really unique model that lets us help people that a lot of times don't have access to audiology care. So that's really gratifying, and I enjoy that a lot. One of the big challenges on the professional side in the audiology space has been that the market's changed quite a bit. And now insurance companies are changing the way reimbursement works and making that more challenging. Over-the-counter hearing aids are out now. And so there's a lot of stress and fear with audiologists of like, how do we keep providing this really high standard of care, but continue to remain profitable and be able to operate my practice and make a living? And a lot of that does come down to the actual consultation process. How do we communicate to a patient in a really relatively short window of time all of the value that they get from the clinical care from the provider, as opposed to just buying a set of hearing aids? Because there's I think this mindset with most people who have hearing loss and are looking to treat it, that I just need to buy hearing aids. Right.
Well, I guess the question I always ask you is, when somebody says I have hearing loss, what does the physician or anybody tell them? Go get hearing aids, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
that's what they do rather than get their hearing loss treated, right?
That's where our mind goes. Yeah, immediately. Yeah. But as you and I both know, it's more complicated than that. We're actually retraining a person's auditory system, their brain, to hear properly again. And that takes time, and it takes commitment from a professional that knows what they're doing to guide them through that journey. And that's why so many people are dissatisfied with hearing aids, because they just go into a place, they buy hearing aids, and the place says, call me if you have any questions. And that's the end of the experience.
And so how, in your practice before or in your coaching, how do you get people to communicate that, that linchpin concept to people?
So, I think one of the biggest challenges we have in our field is low adoption rates. Most patients don't move forward with hearing loss treatment as soon as they realize they have a hearing loss. They either wait a really long time to do it, or they never do it at all. And as a profession, I think we've really struggled with what's the reasoning behind that? What's the psychology there? And I think there are a lot of reasons, but I think ultimately when people talk about the price of hearing treatment, really what they mean a lot of times is, I've heard that hearing treatment is expensive and everybody that does it has a bad experience. And really that second part is the important part. It's not the fact that it's expensive, because we spend a lot of money on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think it's peer experience is the biggest inhibitor to adoption by far.
So if we can do a good job as providers of, educating patients on, here's what hearing loss treatment is. It's not hearing aids. It's a comprehensive rehabilitation process. It's like physical therapy for your ears. If you tore your rotator cuff, you're not going to go into the PT and do one session and expect to go throw a fastball the next day. Right. And it's the same thing with an untreated hearing loss. We have to retrain your brain to hear properly again. And it takes time, and it takes a structured treatment process. And I think when people hear that from their provider and they understand and internalize it, and for some patients, it takes them having a bad experience with these kind of chain retail hearing clinics to realize how important the service actually is.
Right. Yeah. And so, when you talk about that, is there a particular way in the consultative process you try to coach people, or, I get your kind of overarching mindset about it, but what are the specific strategies people use?
Yeah. So, I think that this is just kind of anytime we're having a consultation conversation, I think a lot of times as professionals, what we want to do is educate. We know a lot, we want to help. And so we go into this appointment thinking, I'm going to tell this person all the things they need to know to address this problem. And the issue with that is that most patients, when they come into a doctor's office, they want to feel heard and they want to feel understood, and they want to feel like there was a custom solution that was presented to their specific problem. And so really the first thing that I teach clinicians is the first half of the appointment, all we're doing is asking questions and rephrasing what the patient just said for clarification. You can ask questions and you can rephrase, but you can't teach, you can't educate, you can't correct them if you don't agree with what they just said. All we're doing is understanding where they're coming from, because when we understand the patient's perspective on this problem, then we can speak to them in their language and we can present solutions in a way that is tailored to them and makes sense for their needs and their concerns and the reasons that might be holding them back from treatment.
Yeah, so I guess, you're kind of talking about trying to figure out perhaps from their perspective what the impacts are of their hearing loss. Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yeah. So, imagine you have two different patients, right? One patient comes in, and one of the questions that I teach clinicians to ask is, what's your ideal outcome for today's appointment? Right. And so one patient might say, well, I just want to get a baseline hearing test.
Right.
And another patient might say, well, I can't hear very well in restaurants, and I've been dealing with this for years, and I'm ready to finally do something about it. Right. Those two patients are coming in with a very different expectation of what's going to happen during that appointment.
Sure.
And if I treat that first patient who's just there for a baseline hearing test as if we're going into a sales pitch for hearing aids or for a hearing treatment, that's going to be really off-putting, because they're going to be like, whoa, time out. I'm just here to get a check.
Right.
Right. And so we need to get aligned and on the same page with the patient, so that we're not, because what that does is it erodes trust and it causes them to feel like they're being pushed, even though typically it's done with good intentions. Right. But we just don't realize we're doing it.
Yeah. I hear not uncommonly, people who come to me because I see patients who've often seen other providers, and they'll say, I went in for the problem I'm coming to see you for, and the provider talked a little bit about that, and then they talked about another problem, and they do have that other problem, but it wasn't their top priority. And it was definitely, and so there are actually times where I see patients where they have a significant hearing loss, for instance, but they have something that's more pressing. And so I will oftentimes say, but touch on it. I know this is what you're here for. I'm just touching on this, and that's something we can revisit another time.
Totally. And a lot of it's even just the language we use with the patient. I remember when I very first started practicing, one of my first hearing consultations I ever did, the practice owner sat in the room with me and observed the appointment. And this woman came in, and her primary complaint was tinnitus. She had ringing in her ears. It was really bothering her. And I had this workflow that I was supposed to go through for my consultation, and it was scripted, and I went through it, and she did have a hearing loss. As we know, most people who have tinnitus do have a hearing loss. And so I just jumped straight into talking about hearing treatment, maybe mention this could help with the tinnitus as well. Right. But we in that appointment, she's like, okay, thanks for the information. I'll have to think about it. And she walks out, and then the practice owner is like, what are you doing?
I'm doing what you prescribed for me to do.
I was confused. I was like, I feel like I did everything well. I just followed the script, not realizing that I didn't speak to the woman's concern, which I know as a clinician, treating that hearing loss is going to be part of this treatment process at some point.
Right.
But I need to understand where she's coming from and work alongside her instead of pushing my agenda.
Sure. Yeah, I know. And so I think you're spot on. That might be a hard habit to break. So is it challenging for you to get people to kind of change their mindset? Because I think it's, similarly, right? What you're saying to me is you can't just enter into a conversation with a patient with a prescriptive answer that you think is the right answer. And to some extent, what you're giving is the prescriptive right answer for clinicians. So how do you you're smiling because you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. How do you transition patient or clinicians in the same manner where you get them to, share what they're concerned about and then transition them to understand that this actually is the answer to the problem, right? To some extent, tinnitus is a model. You treat the hearing loss, you treat the tinnitus, right? And so in some ways, how do you get your clients, your audiologic colleagues to transition to that kind of concept?
Yeah. It's so true. So because we have ingrained habits and it's just the way that we're used to talking to patients. A lot of it comes down to practice and role play, just like repetition and getting these new kind of scripts baked into your brain, getting the new approach of I'm not teaching, I'm not correcting, I'm just asking questions. And then I'm using their language that they told me during discovery. I'm using that language when we talk about solutions. So if they said, oh, well, I go to Papados with my son once a month, and the past year and a half, I haven't been able to follow the conversation and it's really upsetting. So now when I talk about solutions, instead of saying you need premium hearing aids that have, this noise reduction algorithm, what I'm going to say is with this treatment solution, when you go with your son to Papados, you're going to be able to follow that conversation again.
Right.
We're putting it in their world instead of in my world. But with clinicians, it's practice, because a lot of this stuff is just really deeply ingrained. And a lot of times we don't even realize we're doing anything wrong.
Well, you're doing it right. You're just doing it ineffectively. How's that for an answer?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
right.
I think
what you're doing is the right way to do what you're doing. It's just not effective to get the outcome that is desired. Right. And so it's not wrong to, I understand. I'm just nuancing it. Right. It's not the wrong thing to do. It's just the ineffective thing to do. And so, but ultimately, if somebody walks out the door with untreated hearing loss, that's a treatment failure. And so, I mean, we want to be right and effective, not just correct and ineffective. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And so what other challenges? So that's a really great take. And so, what other challenges do you see in terms of, where you're helping and coaching people? Where else are kind of some of those more keystone type of things that you help people with?
Well, I mean, one of the programs that I have is basically a database marketing automation program. And that, a lot of what I teach and my programs and stuff, a lot of it, what it comes down to is patient experience. I really believe that, especially as the market changes, things become more competitive. As private practices, we have to be really focused on creating experience. It can't just be about good clinical results anymore. It has to be about making people feel like they're part of our practice and part of our culture. And so I think a big part of that is like, I'll talk to practice owners and they'll say, well, when patients come to our clinic, we follow best practices. Our clinic is beautiful. They have nothing but good things to say. They leave great reviews. And that stuff is all great. But I feel like that's the foundation now. Like you have to have that. That's baseline.
Sure.
But the problem is patients are only in the clinic 2 or 3 hours every year. Right. And then the rest of the year, we're getting like between 4,000 and 10,000 marketing messages a day. And for many of our patients who are older, who are Medicare age and who have hearing loss, and they're on these Advantage plans, they're getting mailers from United Healthcare Hearing or True Hearing talking about this new revolutionary technology that only costs $800, and it's compelling to them. And if I have, as the practice owner, if I haven't done a good job staying top of mind and reminding them that I'm their guide, I'm here for them, right? They're just going to go somewhere else.
So how do you remedy that?
So what I did in my own practice, like I said, I'm a really big geek with this stuff. So like years ago, back 2015, 2016, I used software to build out all of these systems to send, somebody's fit with this set of hearing aids. And now 1 week after, 2 weeks after, 4 weeks, 8 weeks going forward, we're sending them just kind of emails and mailers, just basically getting them like feeling good about being part of the practice, giving them help and advice. Then when warranties expired, notifying them of those types of things. Now the cool thing is a lot of the office management systems actually have patient database marketing built in.
Right.
And so I just took all of that content that I had created for my practice and I put it into Counselor and Blueprint specifically, which are big, audiology office management systems.
Very common platforms, right?
Right. And now you can just plug and play and just use all of my content in your practice. And so you just hit go and like immediately you have a full patient life cycle marketing system.
Just acquire the content from you and then deploy it into their system. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. As soon as they buy it, it just gets installed into their system and it starts working as soon as they say they want to turn it on.
Okay, great. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's really great. And then, so you're offering those types of things, and you don't have to keep on having linchpin things, but are there a couple others that you think are really important in terms of where you get your lift with people?
The other big thing that I work with practice owners on is I do coach practice owners one-on-one, and most of the practice owners that I'm working with one-on-one, they're wanting to build this type of kind of automated practice like I had, where they're no longer the practice is no longer dependent on them, right?
Sure.
There's this concept of like the hit by the bus test. If you got hit by a bus as the practice owner, would the practice be able to keep running or not? And most is no, right? And so that's a huge vulnerability. And so
they're not only the practice owner, they're usually the most effective provider too.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. And people, you think about like a football team, if you had Jerry Jones up in the box, up in the box, and then your quarterback starts having a bad game and he runs down out of the box and jumps on the field and starts throwing the football and acting as the quarterback, that doesn't make sense, right? But as business owners, that's often what we do. That's often what we do.
That actually might make sense to Jerry Jones.
Well, yeah, in this case, it might. Yeah. But that's what we do.
I'm from Philadelphia. I'm an Eagles fan, so I can say that.
Hey, I'm from Dallas. I'm a Cowboys fan, and I feel the same way. So I'm with you. Yeah.
And so how do you help them make that transition? I mean, you're basically trying to, for lack of a better word, like bulletproof their practice from, or make it so it runs absent them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it's a process. And for most practices, there are a lot of systems that are not in place in their practice that we need to build as systems. For most business owners, we just kind of know how things work up in our head. And then when we hire somebody, we try to like kind of offload some of the stuff that's in my head into their head. But then if they leave, it's gone because it was in their head. And instead, what we need to do is create like documented, structured systems for every piece of the practice, so that if I'm gone, there are two other people in the practice that know how to do all of these things that I know how to do.
And so you're talking about, in business speak, SOPs, standard operating procedures or something like that. And so I assume you had developed those for your practice, or no?
Yes. Yeah.
And so is that absolutely what you do, is you give them as a template and then they go forward from there, or do they auto-generate them?
There's some of that. I do find that even though audiology practices are pretty similar, we all are doing things differently. And so I would really rather teach a man to fish. And so I feel like giving people frameworks to understand how to build systems inside of their practice. And a lot, frankly, the best case scenario is if your staff understands how to build systems so they can document everything they do, so that you're not like walking from person to person on your team and being like, hey, did you have all of your people building the system for you. And that's what I teach.
Oh, that's great. And I'm sure, like anything, right? Some people are more coachable than others, right? And so obviously one of the advantages of, or coaches are highly advantageous if you're coachable. And so, like how, and you don't have to, but is this something that you more by and large have success with, or are there some people you just have so much resistance you can't get there?
One of the things I've learned a lot, like patients, you probably know, you talk to enough patients, you can kind of get your spidey senses go up when you're like, oh, you're going to be a problem. You're going to be a real thorn in my side. Right. Not because I'm going to have trouble treating you, but because of your personality. Right. I've now had a couple of experiences with practice owners, and now I have a better sense of some of the red flags that I might look out for. But generally speaking, I think that everybody who's a business owner the biggest bottleneck is mindset, almost always. And so part of what I consider to be my job when I'm coaching somebody is helping them expand their mindset and get out of this thinking of like, oh, everybody wants to see me, I'm the best person to do this, I can't trust people to do these things. Like, we have to work our way out of those mindsets. And I do feel like that's part of my job. But you're right, there are some people that aren't coachable, and that's on them, and they're going to be stuck where they are.
Or I mean, like all of us, right? Like you're referring to, maybe they are coachable, but they need a different coach, and that's not
Sure.
that's not that's nothing disparaging about them or you. I mean, some people like chocolate and some people like vanilla, right? And we're not all going to like everything and always
Yeah.
mesh.
Well, and sometimes it's a timing thing too, because to create any kind of massive change in our life, our current status quo has to hurt bad enough to make change. And some people might think status quo hurts bad enough, but when we actually start talking about what we're going to have to do to make
much
change,
worse. It's much worse.
That feels worse. I can just keep doing what I've been doing, and I know what that looks like, right? This is like trying to lose weight, trying to stop smoking, anything like that. It's like, until it hurts bad enough, I'm just going to kind of kick the can down the road.
Right. And so where do you find yourself coaching most? Early career, mid-career, late career? I mean, one of the things about late career, I'm not sure there are a lot of late careers left because they've all been acquired, but that's a whole nother conversation.
I do find I'm kind of early and middle. I think I tend to attract kind of the more ambitious, more business-oriented people who, want to be more kind of like empire builders and build this big practice up, which is funny because my practice wasn't a big practice. But I do think I get the more business oriented people who just want to really kind of pour fuel on the fire and grow fast, which is cool. And I like being part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? That's not what people are seeing generally. There's consolidation. So it's kind of a contrarian. When I say that to the listeners, there are a lot of private practices that Brad are referring to that the manufacturers have purchased similar to his practice. And so that seems to have been the bigger trend of the past 5 to 10 years has been acquisition and consolidation. But there are some people who want to grow.
Yeah.
And what do you think?
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say
their biggest rate limiting factor in terms of growth.
I mean, for the people who are business oriented, a lot of times it's just a matter of clarity, and it's hard to read the label from inside the jar. So sometimes just having an outside perspective to see like, hey, have we realized that this is perhaps a bottleneck that we could clear pretty easily and create a lot of momentum? Sometimes just having another set of eyes is really helpful because these are smart, capable people. It's not like I'm coming in here and telling them how to run their practice. Right. For the earlier people, a lot of it is mindset. A lot of it is that kind of fear, the scarcity, the feeling of I don't know enough. I'm not good enough at this to grow.
Sure. And so where do you see, this is kind of future looking, where do you see audiology in the, 5 or 10 year horizon?
Man, that's an interesting question.
Very much so.
Yeah, I think that I launched my practice in 2014. And at that point, a big reason that I wanted to do mobile audiology was because at that time, there were things like Uber coming out and I was seeing tech disrupting longstanding industries. And I was like, listen, we are a very technology dependent field. And this technology is getting really good at just kind of being able to self-program or first fit and put it on and get pretty good results for a lot of people. So I definitely still think audiology is very susceptible to disruption. I think that, if Medicare starts covering hearing aids, that's going to cause a pretty huge shift in the business model for most private practices because hearing aids have always kind of been the primary revenue generator in audiology practices. That revenue from hearing aids goes down, and we're looking around trying to figure out where to find new revenue. So really, I think that you're right. I think there's consolidation. I think that you're going to have a lot of the corporations buying up a lot of independent clinics. That's slowing down, but I don't think it'll stop. And I think you'll actually start to see some of these. I think you'll start to see big OTC stores open and that sort of thing as well. The private practices that are going to succeed are going to be the ones with the practice owners that are innovative, that are forward-looking, that are willing to pivot and change quickly, because with the AI and a lot of the stuff that's on the horizon, I mean, physicians are going to be threatened too. There's going to be a lot of pretty significant market threats that we're going to have to focus on creating the service around.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I guess it depends on your perspective. I mean, there is no substitute for two human beings getting together in a room and interacting, right? And you can't necessarily replace that. if AI makes things more standardized or takes you to a certain point faster, I'm all for it, right? But in the end, at some point, it's going to be hands-on type of care. And so I think that's actually what people have to concentrate on. Like, in other words, what are the things that uniquely they do on a human side that is not duplicable or replicable and things like that. I think that's ultimately, and that actually is where you have your value, right? In other words, if you don't want to be just another and you want to have value, it's going to be in that respect.
I think it's really good for patients, because I think a lot of the reason that audiology has been in hot water as a profession is because we're not all bad actors. There are a lot I would say even the majority of people in hearing care are very ethical and patient oriented, but there have been a lot of bad actors who have taken advantage of consumers and sold a product at a very high price and not delivered on service or results. Right. And create, so I think
what's going to shake out are the people who offer the equivalent of an OTC experience and want to charge several $1,000s. Those people are going to shake out, and that's a good thing, right? In other words, they were offering people nothing more than what they could get by mail ordering a hearing device and kind of convincing them that they were getting more than that. And those people will definitely shake out.
That's the good news for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So no, it's going to be kind of interesting. I think ultimately it's going to be kind of an upper echelon of kind of care, and then kind of going from there. It'll be, for the listeners, there was a drive in the early Biden administration for there to be hearing aid coverage by Medicare, but that fell by the wayside. And then I think, it was everywhere in our literature and chatter, in our own news, in the hearing health community's news, and then it died, and now the house is flipped, and I don't think you see any articles about it anymore. It was like almost like an impending happening, and now people don't even talk about it. It's as if it never happened. So it's an interesting transition.
Yeah. It's one of those that it's a question mark, but it's also interesting no longer being in private practice and kind of getting out of the self-preservation kind of mindset that you have when you're in private practice. You're like, you're wanting to protect your business from outside threats. And now I'm seeing the patient's perspective, and I'm like, there are a lot of these things that are very positive for patients.
No, I think anything that, so people have to be willing to be pushed to be better, not to preserve. And so, if in the end it leads to better patient care. Now, so what I will tell you is the caveat of OTCs in the right context makes sense, right? But those are like, that's a big caveat in the right context, right? And so, I think one of the reasons that OTCs are taking is because of what I was referring to, where some people are getting the equivalent of an OTC, over-the-counter hearing aid experience, yet they're being charged several $1,000s for it, and that's egregious. It's really at the higher end where people are getting better service and care that obviously OTCs aren't able to match.
And the interesting thing is when you talk to patients who work with practices that are following best practices and providing premium top-end care, none of them complain about the price. They're all happy that they've invested in like an excellent provider, excellent service, excellent product. So you're right. It's the problematic ones that we need to get out of the system.
Well, the economic, you can't regulate quality, right? And so it's a free market way to kind of push those people out. And so, what I'm going to tell you, I know there's a lot of tension between dispensers and dispensing audiologists. Unfortunately, I see those actors on both sides of that fence. And so,
for sure,
need to be pushed out on both sides. And so, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, that's great. And so, Brad, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Yeah, probably the best way would be, my website, aud.coach. And I have my contact information on there if you want to reach out to me.
So it's the extension is coach. So it's aud.coach. Like, as compared to like amazon.com, yours is aud.coach. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So you can get Brad at aud.coach. Brad, the other question I wanted to ask you is what's your favorite sound?
I love the sound of a running river. I grew up going on summer vacations to Colorado. And I just remember going from hot Texas summer and being in, sitting next to the river, fishing with my dad in Colorado. So that one for sure.
Oh, this is great. For everybody, this is Dr. Bradley Stewart. He's the CEO of AudCoach and founder and creator of the marketing program Automation. If you want to learn more about him, go to aud.coach. Brad, this has been a really great, interesting conversation. I think it's probably something you and I will be able to revisit in a couple of years, and it'll be perhaps a different conversation. Interestingly, maybe the same, which could be somewhat disappointing, but we'll see. But I have to see, your perspective on where the world of audiology and hearing care goes over the next couple of years. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Mark.
It's been great.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listen Up podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.